In this video, I want to dive into an interesting keyboard that was sent to me about a month ago, the LUMINKEY80. I say it's interesting not because it has some wild feature up its sleeve. In fact, it lacks a lot of the flair that I've come to expect from off-the-shelf curated keyboards from companies like ASIO and Lo-Fi, missing things like a distinct theme and complete per-key LED backlighting. No, the LUMINKEY80 is interesting because it somehow delivers truly enthusiast-level craftsmanship on the assembly and tuning side, but at an off-the-shelf pre-built price of $280 USD. And this seems to be how LUMINKEY is trying to stand apart from its parent company, Keycaps, rather than targeting the highest-end enthusiast who wants to manually relube, handpick, and tune components, and is willing to pay a premium to be able to do that. LUMINKEY has spec'd out what they think to be a solid foundation for a truly premium keyboard, like many other companies, but then doubles down on the tuning with an attention to detail that I haven't seen at this production scale before. Don't get me wrong, the LUMINKEY80 has some trade-offs, but let's get into it. As I mentioned, this keyboard has a very basic and minimalistic aesthetic. It's an 80% 87 key TKL with a very smooth and high quality anodized all aluminum body, as well as some copper accents in the form of triangular badges above the arrow cluster, as well as a plain, large weight on the underside. It's worth noting that both are real copper, but have a coating applied to prevent oxidation that gives them a far more textured and matte look than I would have expected based on the company's website images. I opted for the silver version with white on black keycaps, but the case also comes in a black or a retro white color, with the option of creamy pastel 9009 retro keycaps. LUMINKEY also includes one artisan color-matched aluminum keycap in each package, as well as a few bonus off-color keys, which was a nice surprise. The only other case details worth noting are the triangular cuts on each end of the keyboard, which look really clean, as well as a single USB-C port located centrally on the backside. And this brings up my biggest complaint about the LUMINKEY80, the power switch access. This keyboard has a 4,400 mAh battery and supports tri-mode, wired, Bluetooth, and radio frequency connections with 1000 Hz polling over radio frequency or wired and 125 Hz over Bluetooth. It also gets really good battery life, in my testing only dropping to 95% after 40 hours of real-world use. But in order to flip the switch to use that battery, you have to remove the right shift key and awkwardly toggle this small power switch into an on position, which is not the easiest feat in the world if you have stubby fingernails like me. To be fair, this is a hefty keyboard, weighing in at just under 2 kilograms, so I'm not sure that you would be carrying it around and frequently in need of shutting the battery off. And LUMINKEY does include a nice, though really large, carrying case with the keyboard should you decide to transport it. But this just stands out to me as awkward. Personally, I've opted just to leave the battery on all the time, use the keyboard at home, and rely on it dropping into standby or power saving modes after 10 or 30 minutes of inactivity respectively. Finally, though the LUMINKEY80 doesn't have kickstand legs to adjust its angle, it is sloped at 7 degrees towards the user, which I much prefer over the 3 to 5 degree tilt that's more common. I don't have too much to say about the keycaps on the LUMINKEY80, and I'll probably end up replacing them at some point, but they're made by EPBT, have a 1.4mm wall thickness, and clean but simple double-shot PBT legends. They're also sculpted with a cherry profile, which gives them a nice low feel. Unfortunately, they don't come with Mac characters in the front row, which is always disappointing as a Mac user, though the LUMINKEY80 does have both Mac and Windows layers configured. You'll also want to make sure you've matched the front row sizing if you're going to replace these keycaps. Beneath the keycaps are custom collaboration Silva switches from Gateron, not to be confused with the Skyfall Bond villain, though equally suave. These have a 48 gram operating force, with a palm stem and fully nylon housing with a very smooth pre-lubricated action. Honestly, I found most recent generations of Gateron switches to be really consistent across the board, so I'm not surprised that these function so cleanly. They don't have any kind of LED diffusion lens, but that would be largely wasted on the LuminKey80 because only 9 keys across the keyboard have backlighting, including the caps and scroll lock keys, tilde, numbers 1 through 5, and the escape key. All simply light up red to communicate information as needed, except the escape key, which makes full use of that single LED, allowing you to customize its color and dynamic effects, if you can call them that, by way of the keyboard's QMK and VIA compatibility. I would have liked to see this customization extended to all LEDs to allow me to set them to something other than red, but that isn't a huge deal. It's also worth noting that the right control key is actually configured to be the function key by default, though again, you can alter this with VIA. Getting inside the LuminKey80 is quite simple, with just 8 bolts connecting the top and bottom case. Once inside, we find a slim 1mm sheet of pour-on case foam covering a plate that conceals the daughter board and a 2-piece battery. I like how this is cut to form a kind of badge out of the case back. The PCB has a little bit of LuminKey and Keycaps branding and looks simple but quite nice. It also supports both ANSI and ISO layouts, though you'll have to purchase ISO keycaps separately and make the necessary tweaks in VIA. It also features a gasket mounting system with 14 sock-style silicone gaskets that provide a force break between the top and bottom case. In addition, we can see Gateron hot swap sockets, as well as screw-in PCB-mounted Gateron PBT stabilizers, which again are hand-tuned by LuminKey for each keyboard. Between the polycarbonate positioning plate and the PCB, there's a 3.5mm sheet of pour-on plate foam, as well as a thin 0.5mm of PE foam acting as one large switch pad. The only other thing worth noting is that the few LEDs that are on the PCB are south-facing, hence why we can get away with the cherry keycaps. And all of this comes together to give the LuminKey80 a pretty professional sound, but have a listen for yourself. As you may expect from my intro, I honestly think the LuminKey80 has the best off-the-shelf sound and feel of any keyboard that I've tested to date. It's quite loud, so I'm not sure I would recommend it for shared workspaces, but it has a very clean and crisp sound, and no real discernible stabilizer rattle, which is awesome. My only nitpick from an audio perspective is that the keycaps give off a slight scratchiness as my fingernails drag and transition between keystrokes, but this is quite minor. That said, I'll leave you with this consideration. To spec out comparable keycaps, stabilizers, and switches, you're probably looking at around $160 USD. This cuts the $280 pre-assembled price down to about $120, which also includes professional grade tuning. Now, if you're in the hobby because you enjoy tuning your mechanical keyboard, this probably isn't super appealing. But if, like me, you just want a professionally tuned, truly enthusiast quality mechanical keyboard that you can customize with switches and keycaps as you please, this seems like surprisingly good value in my opinion. Keep in mind, I did receive this keyboard for free from LuminKey, but as always, they didn't have any say in my video content, because if you're going to use any of this to make a buying decision, you only get value from this video if I'm honest and point out both the good and quirky things, which I hope I've done. That said, what do you think? Is the LuminKey80 something you want to try? Or is there something else that you think is better? Let me know using the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for sticking around. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.